The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. Over the Labor Day weekend, 48 people were shot in New York City, and more have been shot since, including the shooting of a teenage basketball star in Harlem and a horrific shooting in Queens just yesterday. Many in the Bronx see these shootings as the last straw and have followed the borough president's lead on a Peace in Our Streets initiative, which includes support for the NYPD's Gun Stop campaign that gives rewards to Bronxites who report illegal gun activity. But is this enough? And is there more that can and should be done to keep guns off our streets and keep all of us safer? Also, are there social reasons that can help explain this disturbing trends? Tough questions with tough answers. You can weigh in tonight with your opinion at 718-960-7241. You can also email comments to us at BronxTalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Please join me in welcoming the Executive Director of New Yorkers Against Gun Violence, Jackie Hilley. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. And a Monroe College professor of criminal justice who had a distinguished 22-year career with the NYPD as a detective, investigator, researcher, and in other positions. Please join me in welcoming Professor Hector Gonzalez. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you.
Folks, I want to just start off with a simple question. I guess, Professor Gonzalez, I'll start with you. Do you have an idea of why this would be happening now? Why are we getting this terrible spike in gun violence in the city of New York and in the Bronx?
I don't know if it's, if things should be happening now, because it seems like, recently there seems to have been a spate of all these different gun-related, shootings and everything. But throughout the years, the availability of weapons out there, and then one of the things is sometimes having these weapons in the hands of different people who, some people may be impulsive. They may just act without thinking, not thinking of consequences, to themselves, to people around them. As we all know, things are rough right now in the economy. So who's to say if desperate times could maybe lead to some people becoming desperate, and putting a gun in the hand of someone like that, who has no regard for themselves or others, it's a deadly, dangerous combination.
I would think that sociologists would look at the economy and the sense of joblessness, and in many cases, sense of hopelessness, certainly with school students who say, gee whiz, why even go to school, because what's in it for me? I might not get a job. And then, of course, we'll talk with Ms. Hilley about the availability of guns, and then that would happen. I mean, that would seem to make just plain logical sense.
I mean, you may have some kids growing up here in the Bronx, in New York City, or also other regions of the the United States of America, that they may not be aware of other options. Some kids may think that it's a badge of honor to be tough. It's a badge of honor to be violent and use violence, and in certain neighborhoods, sadly, having these street smarts and being seen as a tough person, whether it's physically fighting or using weapons or using guns, in certain neighborhoods may almost be seen as a badge of honor. So I think one of the issues would be trying to raise awareness, letting kids know that there are other options out there. You don't necessarily have to, get into a fight. You don't have to directly go to the gun and take it to that that level where it's a deadly escalation. You know, let them know there are other options available.
I hate to use Bronx terms, but sometimes it's the punk that has the gun because he or she, of course, doesn't have other ways of feeling proud, so they resort to something so outlandish that makes them feel stronger than maybe they really are in life. But I want to talk a little bit about the NYPD. So the NYPD knows, and Ray Kelly and commissioners before him know that we're in the middle of this spike. Do they do anything to react to it, or are the gun control and gun stop initiatives in place so that, well, they just keep doing what they do, or do they change tactics and maybe handle things in a different way when the numbers, you know, show an obvious spike?
Well, there are different strategies that you know, NYPD has utilized in the past, and they're currently utilizing. One of the things they use is an operation called Operation Impact, where you have police officers who have newly graduated from the police academy, and when they graduate from the police academy and they hit the streets, most of these newer officers are assigned to certain areas, certain precincts that have seen a spike in shootings or other related incidents. So one strategy would be having more uniformed police presence, okay?
In areas that, of course, through CompStat, they're aware
CompStat, or areas where you have certain spikes, let's say in shootings or other violent crimes. So that's one strategy. Another strategy where sometimes the public doesn't see is you have, you know, firearms task force and other units where you have plainclothes officers, you know, detective investigators. These guys and ladies, you know, work undercover, and they do what they can to, you know, purchase weapons and, you know, conduct investigations, whether it's with the New York City Police Department, New York State Police, the federal ATF, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms.
And you'd like to think they're working in
trying to have at least, you know, nice collaboration to try to get at trying to, you know, have these investigations regarding getting some of these guns off the street.
I do want to ask you about stop and frisk, which we're going to do, and it's a very personal topic to many people in the Bronx. I want to get Ms. Hilly into the dialogue. In terms of balancing what the cause might be, in your mind, is there a percentage and say, well, obviously, you know, legislation, and that's an important thing that you're going to talk about, is a cause of it, or you know, loose legislation potentially, and also some of the societal factors. Do you balance them and say, well, it's 40% this or 50% this or anything like that? Do you have a sense of, just in terms of getting at the roots of why this might be?
Well, I think most of the issues that we're talking about in terms of young people having crime guns and available crime guns in New York City really relate to illegal guns coming from other states. Every time the ATF has traced the guns that the police and the FBI and other agents submit for tracing that we already know have been used in crime. So this doesn't include guns that have never been found or guns that may, you know, be suspected of being used in crimes. Every time they trace them, they find that 90%, close to 90% of the guns in New York City come from other states. And we know exactly which states they are as well. And we know they're Pennsylvania, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida. And those are the big five for New York City. So we know there's a pipeline of illegal guns coming from those states. And in those states, as in the majority of states in this country, there is no check done on that first sale. Once that first sale happens and the gun walks out the door, and there have been a lot of undercover operations done. The Brady campaign did one. The Mayors Against Illegal Guns have done it. You can see people going into gun shows where the law is broken in those gun shows. Those are not law-abiding citizens that are selling guns to people when they know they shouldn't be, because even a private seller who is told by a prospective purchaser, I couldn't pass a background check under federal law, should say, I can't sell it to you.
So for you, it's not necessarily a matter of, well, there's a greater pipeline at this moment or these last couple of weeks. For you, this stream is significant, and when those factors hit, that's when we see more of it because the guns are out there.
Well, the guns,
yeah,
there's an unlimited supply of illegal guns available to anybody who wants to go down to Virginia, to Pennsylvania, to other places to purchase them and bring them to New York City and other places where we have stricter laws. Because if you look at the reverse of the figure that I've just given you, that 90% of the crime guns come from other states, 10% of the crime guns used in New York City come from New York State. So we're doing a pretty good job of making sure that law-abiding citizens get guns in New York State. which creates, unfortunately, a need for guns among the illegal crowd that wants them. So you have gangbangers and drug dealers and other people who prey on communities. And in those situations, the guns are freely available. And frankly, there are many, many people, all the people that we just spoke about, who are injured because they happen to live in communities that are poor.
You know, before the program, I did a number of studies of blogs and Facebook and things like that. And one of the things that comes up with people who don't agree with you, and they say New York has the toughest gun laws out there, yet we have this spike in gun shootings. Doesn't it feed into the theory of people who say gun control doesn't work? Here you are, you have a state that has the toughest laws in the country, and yet we're having a show tonight to talk about terrible shootings and a spike in gun violence. So therefore, the answer is not in legislation.
No, the answer is in legislation, and it is in policy and in practice. Over the course of my experience in criminal justice in the city of New York since the early 80s, the homicide rate and the crime rate has gone down dramatically. And the policing things that we had talked about and following up on a lot of the things that we just discussed in terms of putting officers on the street, all of those policing techniques have managed to bring the crime rate way down. The problem is there are still literally truckloads and carloads of guns coming from states that have weak gun laws. And not only that, there are enthusiasts in those states that are purchasing guns like crazy. I mean, you can see, if you go to a gun show, you will see people literally filling their trunks with very, very high-powered weapons. We're not even talking about ordinary semi-automatic weapons.
And why are they doing that? What are they using those guns for? Are they simply selling them to people who might do ill? Are they collecting them? What are they doing with those? Are they hunting?
Once they go out the door and they're in their person's trunk, there's very, very little in the way of tracing those guns. And one of the pieces of legislation that we support is microstamping, because when you see all the police officers at a crime scene and you see them putting cones on shell casings, if there's no gun on the scene, the only way that the police can trace those casings back to the gun that fired it is by putting it in a system which registers crime guns that have already been used in crime. So if it's the first time, if you got a gun in Georgia and you came to New York and it was a semi-automatic and you shot it for the first time, it's a freebie. There is no record of that gun in that system. So there's no tracing that gun. That's what happens with these guns.
And so what you're saying with microstamping is there will be a record of that gun from the minute it is sold anywhere in the United States.
Well, the microstamping law that's before New York is a New York law that impacts New York. But if a police officer finds a shell casing on the ground, that will have a code that will connect it back to the serial number of the gun. It'll still have the unintentional markings.
So you will know where that gun came from and potentially
you'll know the first sale. So you'll have two things available to you. The first thing is you'll have a better lead, a more immediate lead, and I'm sure Hector will tell you this too. The faster you get a piece of evidence that's a viable piece of evidence in criminal investigation, the more likely it is you might find the suspect with the guys he did it with the proceeds of the crime, driving the car, wearing the clothes, in the same neighborhood.
Or even the roots of the gun and who sold the gun and what is
exactly.
You know, there's another theory that's out there. And one Facebook posting I read said, lock and load. If you know I'm armed and I'm serious, you'll leave me alone. If there are more guns out there, and there are people who believe this, that if more people are armed, then people who might rob you at gunpoint or might do something would be less likely to do so because they would know that they are in danger. Do you support that theory, and do you think the NYPD buys into that?
Personally, I don't support it, and I don't think the NYPD would support that neither, because, I mean, you have certain other states in the United States, I believe Texas has laws on the books where you have people where they can carry guns and they could have the guns, you know, in plain view. And a lot of people are known to carry guns in Texas, and Texas, you know, they still have their problems. So I don't know if, you know, letting everyone being able to arm themselves
is going to keep us safe.
Is going to be a viable solution.
You have a thought, and then we're going to go to the telephone.
Well, the Harvard School of Public Health has done many, many studies over the years, and the 5 states that have the highest rates of gun ownership have among the highest rates of death by gun, and particularly highest rates of police officers dying. And so that's is the first fact that disputes this notion that everybody is safer if everybody is armed. The second thing is that even police marksmen who are trained in sort of tension situations only hit their mark between 25 and 30% of the time. And most recently in Nevada, when the man went in and killed those 4 National Guardsmen, there was an armed spectator on the side who said there was no way I was taking out my gun because his firepower was so much greater than mine. The guy had an Uzi with a 30-round clip. So there is no way, with the sophistication of the weapons that people are able to buy and the magnitude of the clips, that defense of yourself in that circumstance is going to work out in your favor.
Let's go to the telephone. I think first up is Mark from Pelham Parkway. It's been a couple of weeks. Mark, how are you?
Yeah, Gary.
What's up?
I'm going to make a statement. I don't know if people are going to like what I'm going to say or hate what I say.
It never
You know,
stopped
I
you
do a lot of
before,
work
did
up
it?
in Montreal, and I can tell you, Montreal for the year so far has only had 26 homicides. When I was working up there, one of the guys brought me an article that was very interesting, one of those weekends that we had 24 or 28 people killed here. And he also brought up the state. He says, don't you live in the Bronx too? I go, yeah. And he says, hey, look, your borough, where you live, has the best rate if you want to get arrested and get away with crime.
Well,
I think
that's
it's
another
interesting
issue too, sure.
that we don't have laws. You want to do away, don't blame other states. What you got to start blaming is the justice system itself. When people get caught with a firearm, it's a first-time offense, put them away for 5 years, like they do in other places. You get caught using a gun in a commission of a crime, bye-bye. Don't blame other states, because as long as
your point
we
is
start
if
coddling these people
I
with the guns and doing it, you're going to have children dying. Because when they have a beef with someone else, they don't man up and fight in a ring or something. They pull out a gun and they can't shoot, and they end up shooting innocents. And if you brought back a death penalty and executed a few of these, you might just stop this violence.
Well, you've gone from putting away for 5 years to executing them. That's probably a pretty large leap. We'll start with you because you work for the NYPD. Are the laws for, let's say, first offense, commission of a crime with the use of a gun, are they strong enough right now? And especially in the Bronx, where there is a perception and maybe even reality that people don't get convicted for things, is that contributing to this issue?
I think the laws are strong, but like Jackie mentioned, there's always room for improvement as far as strengthening our gun laws. But one of the things I wanted to mention in response to what he mentioned is when you conduct a criminal investigation, there are a lot of different facets, identifying your offender, trying to apprehend and arrest the offender, and then good police officers or experienced detectives know it just doesn't end with the arrest. It ends up hopefully with having a solid case when you present it at a criminal trial. And one of the things I've had to deal with when I was a detective working in the 4-2 detective squad in Bronx Night Watch, investigating murders, shootings, and stabbings, was sometimes having witnesses who maybe didn't want to cooperate, or sometimes people that would fall into that mantra of
so you're
don't
really
snitch.
Getting into his thing about why maybe the
trying to put trying to put together a good case so that way you could do the best you can.
Are there things that would help you as a police officer or the district attorney to put a better case together that could be done legislatively? Well,
legislatively, trying to strengthen gun laws, but I think one thing would be trying to have good community relations, having a good partnership between the police and the community, because quite frankly, the police department, even though they do a great job, they can't do it alone. Yeah. They need the community, and one of the things I found in my experience as a police officer is sometimes you would have people, they don't want to get involved in a case because it doesn't involve them, their family, and there may be fear of retaliation.
And that makes it harder for you to bring a case. Now, do you have thoughts on
Well,
this,
I was going to agree with Hector, because I think from my experience with the community, I think that the police department has made great strides in reaching out to the community and trying to make officers available. I think the problem is the community still sees the streets flooded with illegal guns. And what I try to say to community members when we speak to them is, you have to give the police actionable information. I've had conversations with people who say, there's a guy who's selling drugs and guns out of the back of his car on 125th Street. And I told the police that. And I will say to the people, look, if the cops come to 125th Street and see hundreds of people standing there or 30 people standing there, they can't go up and find out who that person is unless you tell them it's the guy with the Chevy with the New York license plate who's 30 to...
Well, this really feeds right into what the borough president and many Bronxites are trying to do with the Peace in Our Streets initiative, and that is to ask Bronxites, because the theory would be that people know who's got a gun or who's been using it or who's been threatening, et cetera, and to have people actually, anonymously give information. I guess that feeds right into what both of you are saying.
Yes, I mean, I think that would be very helpful for the police, because then they have probable cause to go and stop that person.
Right. Let's say hello to our friend Robert from the South Bronx. Oh, it's been a little while for you too, Robert. How are you?
Good, Gary.
Good. What's up?
Just a few quick points. The police department did a great job when it came to cleaning up Hunts Point with the prostitution, but yet they can't seem to get the gangs off the street, and a lot of this come from gang members, young gang members that don't have jobs. And a lot of them are being told to, put the work in to become gang members, and a lot of these shootings are coming from them.
Right.
But yet, like I said, they clean up one part of crime in the Bronx, but yet they can't do the other part. And
Robert, hang on one sec. We're just getting some feedback there, and we're having a little hard time hearing you down here. So go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead. Try it again.
Yeah. So like I said, they did a great job of cleaning up Hunts Point with the prostitution. But yet they can't seem to get these gang members and these gangs off the street, because that's where most of this violence is coming from.
Right. So you're saying, and then I know that you mentioned the notion of unemployment. People don't have jobs or occupations or productive activities, and this contributes to it as well. Robert, thank you so much for your input. Let's talk about that. It is interesting. We've got prostitutes out of many neighborhoods, yet we can't get gangs off the streets. A more difficult problem than even the world's oldest profession.
Think too, a lot of times is resources. I mean, the police department, I retired about a year ago. They're down a few thousand officers, and I'm not saying this as an excuse for the NYPD, but obviously addressing, he mentioned they addressed the prostitution, now trying to address gang members, issues of guns on the street and everything else. But now you have the police department, they have a few thousand, we're down in manpower, personnel, male and female police officers, a few thousand people, and then also dealing with traditional policing, not just in the Bronx and other areas, but terrorism and all these other responsibilities. So
you're saying the numbers of officers, and we talked about that right at the top of the show, that they'd like to flood more uniform officers, but of course if you don't have them, you can't do it. I did promise our viewers a little dialogue on stop and frisk. There is considerable concern, and I think much of it is justified, about more stop and frisk, because of course it leads to targeting people of certain ethnicities, et cetera, et cetera. Are you in favor of stepping up stop and frisk during times like these, or is that a slippery slope to run, because then you really start infringing on lawful people's rights?
I'm a retired detective, but I'm also a lifelong Bronxite, pretty much since the age of 3, raised in the Bronx, and I think it would be a slippery slope. I think the police as it is, they're out there, the guys and ladies who are out there doing the stops and frisks, questioning people and everything else, but at the same time, there is a thing called the U.S. Constitution. There is such a thing as Bill of Rights and everything else.
So you say even with this terrible spike in gun violence, you're not willing to go that far and say, you know what, let's go out there and start frisking people.
Because then you start looking at, right, I mean, now, you're stopping everyone, okay? And, granted, you may have people out there that have guns, have other weapons and everything else, but at the same time, one of the things that I would tell younger officers is trying to maintain your professionalism and being professional. And if you have reasonable suspicion where you could stop, question, and possibly frisk someone, then you can go from there. But
Ms. Hilly, let's go to the phrase that we've heard for generations: guns don't kill people, people kill people. I'm guessing that's not something you support all too well. What's out there right now that you think either can hurt or help from a legislative perspective? I know the Stearns bill is something of concern to New Yorkers against gun violence.
Yes, well, we've been working on the Stearns bill, which is a bill that is come around for the second time. It was brought up and defeated in 2009. It's supported by Senator Thune. And just on a basic states' rights theory, it's a really offensive bill.
Can we explain to people what is in this bill that is of concern
Sure.
to
So
you?
basically what Senator Thune would like to do is to provide people who have concealed carry permits in all 50 states the right to carry their concealed weapons from their state where they live through all the 50 states using the permit from the state where they live. And the problem with that is that there are 50 different permits with 50 different standards, and some states, like New York, right now we don't recognize reciprocity from any other state. So to carry a concealed weapon in New York on your person in a public place, you have to have a New York City permit or a New York State permit. You can't just come in here.
But this would allow you to come in from elsewhere, and then New York City would not, and New York State would not be able to say, you know what, you can't do that here,
right,
because the gun was licensed elsewhere.
And just to give you a sort of a glimmer of what kind of a nightmare it is.
We don't have a ton of time, and I want to put some information
Okay,
on.
so it's really literally millions of guns coming to New York. New York State has issued 68,000 concealed carry permits. The state of Florida has issued 500,000, Georgia has issued 300,000, and Texas has issued 650,000.
So technically, somebody, I want to just speed it up, somebody could go to one of those states if this bill were to pass, and then come and carry a concealed weapon in New York, and there would be nothing from a legal perspective that Mr. Gonzalez and his colleagues could do, or anybody else to stop them.
Well, the most offensive part of it is that they're telling us how to use our very limited police resources that we've just spoken about, how hard-pressed we are in New York to use our police resources the way we've thought they should be used. Now, somebody from South Dakota, population 800,000, with 2 senators and 1 congressman, is telling New York State, population 28 million, how to use our police resources. I find it really offensive. I think it's a nightmare for public safety. New York City doesn't need more guns.
Let's put up, we're just about out of time. Let's put up New Yorkers Against Gun Violence. We have the information number, and if you want to participate in that, and certainly if, I guess if you know of somebody with a gun, you call your local precinct and let them know, and you will, we're just about out of time, so that's the answer, right? That's what you want to do. Hector Gonzalez from Monroe College, thank you so much. Continue educating young people about how to fight crime. We really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Jackie Hilley from New Yorkers Against Gun Violence, we thank you for joining us as well. Folks, if you have further comments or questions on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, and email them to us at BronxTalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Archives of Bronx Talk are available at BronxNet.org. You click Bronx Talk, which is on the right-hand navigation bar toward the bottom. We'll see you next Monday night, and every Monday night, of course, at 9 for Bronx Talk. Special thanks to producer Jane Folloro, director Michael Arias, Dina, and our cast of thousands who are around us and up in the booth. And to you, good night.
Let's celebrate the gateway to America. It's the 7th annual Viva Bronx Festival, Sunday, October 2nd from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. between 144th and 149th Street in the Grand Concourse. This is at Hostos Community College, featuring great artists with crafts, food, and activities for the whole family. Celebrate Viva Bronx, Sunday, October 2nd from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. between 144th and 149th Street in the Grand Concourse.